Received this 8-day Seikosha Ships Clock for inspection and possible restore. Mounting brackets used to mount on the ship are fastened with a rivet at each location. This bracket has had the rivet replaced with a brass screw, and this bracket is slightly loose. There's a repair tag that was put on in 2017. OH and bush means it was overhauled and bushings were installed. Fit balance? Sounds like it may have been fitted with a balance. Side of case has several dents in it. Serial number has been buffed off. This reddish color is some of the original copper plating. I believe this case had a silver finish on it originally. Nice thick beveled glass, and it's in great shape. Dial protector. Seconds hand is screwed onto the brass tube on these. Original hand washer. Original minute hand. Hour hand on these are held in with a screw. The hands have been refinished over some heavy rust. They've definitely seen some service around saltwater. Back of dial is silvered and has some white residue, probably buffing compound or silver polish. Fingerprint damage. More fingerprint smear damage. Painting of the numbers is a little messy. I'll be resilvering the dial, so they'll be cleaned up then. Inside of the case is heavily oxidized. This bracket has been abraded and soldered. Bluish buffing compound that came through the crack. This bracket as well has abrasion marks around it and has been soldered. The inside of the latch. The heads on the fasteners to the hinge are almost completely rusted away. Glass has been mounted in place using some type of modern clear adhesive. And there's a chip here and there on the beveled edge of the glass. Dial support pan has some heavy rust pits. Plates are held together by these 4 fasteners. Center wheel pivot has some black oil in it. Nice crosshatch design milled in the plates. These screws have signs of rust on them. Plate run number of 91. Fasteners on the platform escapement have heavy rust damage. Fingerprint and what looks like solvent residue stains has damaged the gold gilt on the back plate. These dark spots is where the gold gilt is missing. Oil in this pivot is real dirty. Nice little feet to hold the movement upright when making adjustments. Some still shots of dirty oil in the pivots and fingerprint damage. Remove the platform escapement dust cover. Gold gilt is intact on the inside. These dark areas on the outside is where the gold gilt is missing. Remove this rusty dial backing plate. Someone has painted over the rust here. Should be derusted and sealed with a coat of paint. A couple tool marks on the front plate here, and fingerprint damage on the front plate as well. Rust damage on the minute wheel pinion. Signs of rust damage here. Not good. More rust on this arbor. Rust pits are deep. To let the power down on these fusees, the escape wheel needs to be removed first. So the power train needs to be jammed. No power to the escape wheel, so platform escapement can be removed safely. Now to release the power on the fusee slowly. As the power releases, the chain winds up on the outside of the mainspring barrel. The chain still has tension on it. Next step is to release the mainspring power at the mainspring barrel. This screw should only be loosened when servicing the movement. The click on the mainspring barrel is fastened tight with the click screw. Now the click is released to let down the remainder of the power. The mainspring has from 1.5 to 2.5 turns on it. Now that the chain is loose and all power is let down, it's safe to disassemble the movement. Ratchet wheel, minute wheel cock, numbered 51, minute wheel, heavy rust damage on this pinion, hour wheel assembly, hour wheel bridge, numbered 51, a brass shim. Not sure of its function. I'll keep this in mind on reassembly and see if it's needed for clearance. Cannon pinion, compression washer, barrel click. All these dark blackish areas on the plate is where the gold gilt is damaged. It's the underlying brass that has oxidized. Interesting. This bare brass shows the gold gilt was applied sometime after the parts were assembled. Never seen it done this way before. Wonder if it's possible the gold gilt was added sometime after the movement was made. Looks like a bushing that went through the gold gilt process. Some small amount of wear on the center wheel arbor, some wear here, mainspring and fusee pivots. Fourth wheel pivot is fairly loose. This is a thrust bearing. These black darkish areas is where the gold gilt is thin and missing. A little rust on the fusee chain. Overall, it looks like this has had some time in the salt air. Fourth wheel. A lot of rust damage here. Third wheel, numbered 51. Rust damage as well. Fusee ratchet, numbered 51. Rust damage. The fusee, the gold gilt is thin, numbered 42, rust damage. This single pin here is for the fusee chain to hook to. Fusees that use catgut have 2 pins. Just look at the excess oil. Center wheel, numbered 51, gold gilt is thin, and lots of rust. Mainspring barrel, gold gilt is thin here as well. It's numbered 51, fusee chain, matching 51 number on the inside of the barrel. The spring has been shortened. Now to pull the fusee apart to inspect it. Pin on this spring fits into the hole in the fusee ratchet wheel. Numbers 42 on the spring and wheel. The fusee ratchet wheel has a click assembly inside. All matching numbers on this fusee assembly. Ratchet wheel looks in good shape. Small amount of green corrosion, could stand a good cleaning. Doesn't look like it was taken apart on the last several cleanings. Now to inspect the platform escapement. Hairspring stud on these is attached to the hairspring cock. I'll need to unpin the hairspring from it first. Gold gilt is thin. Rusty screw. Rust in this area could only be from the balance wheel rim or hairspring. The number 64. Missing gold gilt in these dark areas. Gold gilt is thin. Rust damage on these screws. The regulator pins have been thinned on the tips. Excessive rust damage on this balance wheel assembly. Bluish areas on the balance wheel arm is from someone overheating it. This happens when someone attempts to take the temper out of the balance staff to repivot it. Roller table, balance staff, and balance wheel show signs of heavy rust damage. Escape wheel and pallet cock. Pallet fork has heavy rust damage. The two pallet jewels. Rust damage on this pivot. Escape wheel itself is in fair shape. Rust damage on this pivot. I'll clean this up and inspect it further. Mainspring has been butchered. Functional, but has been abused. These are tool marks, most likely from attempting to install it in the barrel with some type of pliers instead of a mainspring tool. Center of mainspring has been shortened and a new hole put in it. I've done a pre-cleaning on this, so we'll take a closer look at what we have to work with here. Looking at the mainspring barrel arbor, the back plate pivot looks like it has been hand-filed. There's flat spots on it. Bearing surface on the front has rust pit damage on it. Number 51 on the barrel. Dark areas on the outside of the barrel is where the fusee chain has worn the gold gilt off. Tool marks. Someone has filed the hook on this mainspring arbor. This bearing surface is pitted from rust. A file has been used on this pivot. More rust damage on this bearing surface. These rust pits are bad. The fusee itself is in good shape. Fusee assembly looks good and serviceable. The back plate pivot is in fair shape. This surface looks better than the rest. Fusee arbor bearing surface is rust pitted. Center wheel assembly. Center wheel rear pivot is scored. Bearing surface where it rides on the front plate is rust pitted and scored. Fourth wheel teeth show slight wear. Rust damage on the rear pivot. Rust damage on the center portion of the arbor. And rust damage on the pinion. Bearing surface is scored with a few rust pits. This section is where the second hand attaches. The minute wheel pivot is scored with rust pits. Rust damage on the pinion is excessive, along with the pivot. Escape wheel, rust damage on the escape wheel pivot, and rust damage on the pinion. Rust damage on the pallet fork. The arbor and part of the pivot is eaten away from rust. Balance wheel has been butchered. The rusty staff has been repivoted somehow. Interesting looking repivot work here. Balance wheel arm has a blue heat-treated area on them. Balance wheel arm has been overheated, probably when the new pivot was installed. Black area on the roller table is rust damage. Roller jewel has been replaced with a steel pin. Someone enlarged the hole in the roller table and cut through into the guard pin relief slot. The steel pin has been friction fit instead of using shellac. Now the roller table has been split. There's a crack in it right here. Lots of rust on the balance wheel rim. Here's some still shots of some of the damage on this movement. The owner has decided to only preserve this movement. A restoration will be scheduled at a later date. The defects have been documented and the rust has been neutralized. I was only asked to polish several of the worst pivots, and it's time to reassemble. On these fusees, the chain is wound on the fusee first, then wound on the mainspring barrel. Once this is done, the mainspring is tensioned from 1.5 to 2.5 full winds. Then the mainspring arbor is locked in place. Time for the platform escapement. This one screw has been stripped. I'll see if this radical will be able to pull it out. Oh, that worked out nice. I'll clean this by hand and get it back into place. Take this balance jewel out. Oh, the jewel is cracked. Small drop of oil on the cap jewel. Clean and lubricate the escape wheel jewels. Balance wheel. Pull this hairspring just the right amount to put it in beat. Get this platform escapement installed. Give it some power Seems to be running strong. I've resilvered the dial. It's time to touch up the numbers. Dial's been clear coated. This will stop it from tarnishing and prevent future fingerprint damage to it. The dial backplate has had the rust neutralized and painted to seal the bare steel. Time to mount the dial in the hands. Platform escapement dust cover. This is going to be used as a static display item until a restore is completed, sometime in the future. A nice looking Seikosha deck clock.